Welcome everyone to the last week of rodents. So we've talked about rodents for 2 weeks. This is the last week. Before we get on to the species that we need to know for Montana, I want to touch on just a couple of groups of rodents from around the world that are really interesting that I haven't had a chance to mention before. First, we have the spring hare, this large kind of rabbit-like face almost, I think. Unrelated to the jerboas or the kangaroo rats, it's a separate lineage of jumping rodent, which is quite large, and as I have some stats over there, and can jump quite high and far. Another group that we don't have in Montana but are still interesting are the mole rats, including bamboo rats, top right, less not as fossorial as the other ones. You probably aren't familiar with these mole rats, but maybe you've heard of the naked mole rat. Well, this is a different family of mole rats that is completely unrelated to the previous slide. Something that I find really interesting is that we see these mole rats here, these mole rats here. Last week I mentioned the tuco in South America, and we have our pocket gophers. So there are all these different lineages of subterranean rodents. Naked mole rats especially interesting because they're the only mammal that has a eusocial society, meaning that there is one individual queen that reproduces while you have these other workers living in a colony. And they are really, really terrible at thermoregulating because they just spend all of their time deep underground where things are consistent temperature. Naked mole rats really cool and a little ugly, but I think they're still cute. Okay, and then the last group of non-Montana group rodents are the dormice here, which are adorable. They're called dormice because they hibernate, and dor comes from the Latin for sleep, like dormir if anyone studied Spanish. And this one on the right, the edible dormouse, is called that because back in Roman times, it was a delicacy. So it was edible, and we still call it that. But we don't have these in North America. Now, this is the group that we're going to talk about today, Chrysalidae. Last week, we talked about some chrysalids. We talked about things like deer mouse and the pack rat, these New World rats and mice. Now we're going to talk about the other chrysalids. One big group that, first of all of Chrysalidae is myomorphic, bottom left corner. So if you look at the skulls head on, you see vertical holes. All right, so within Chrysalidae, there are hamsters, which we don't have in North America, but they are wild across Eurasia and I believe Africa. Not 100% sure on that. European hamsters are adorable, far right, and these wild hamsters are where we get our hamster pets. Now I apologize for the kind of gruesome picture on the bottom, but you can see a dissected hamster with its internal cheek pouches full of seeds. Now I like this photo because it gives you an idea of how large cheek pouches are, and you can see the difference here between these internal cheek pouches of the hamster versus the external cheek pouches of the pocket mouse, kangaroo rat, and pocket gopher that we saw earlier. All right, so now lemmings are a group of chrysalids that we do have in North America and in Montana. Mostly though, they're found in the further north in polar regions, subpolar, etc. Lemmings refer to a large number of species that live in these environments, generally a little stockier than, say, a vole, shorter tail. Now, people probably have heard the term lemming before and have a lot of misconceptions. So there's this idea in popular culture that lemmings, when they run out of food, they form these mobs and jump off of cliffs and blindly follow each other and just commit mass suicide. That is totally, totally false. What is actually happening is that lemmings reproduce so fast that they have these crazy boom and bust population fluctuations. And so you get times where there's a lot of food, reproduce a lot, and then there are too many, not enough food, population crashes. And to explain these crashes, people came up with wild ideas such as mass suicide, which was especially popularized in a Walt Disney documentary in the late 50s, where this quote unquote documentary showed lemmings jumping off cliffs when actually filmmakers were throwing lemmings off of cliffs and claiming it was natural. They also claimed to film lemming migration by putting lemmings on a little snow-covered turntable and then like saying, look at them going miles and miles. Anyway, that's totally false. So lemmings do not do that. They don't follow each other to their death. They don't jump off cliffs. They don't commit mass suicide. Not that we have, oceans for them to jump into here in Montana. This one, the northern bog lemming, is the species that we do get in Montana. And it's about as far south as lemmings get. Enough about lemmings. Moving on to the muskrat. This is the largest rodent in this subfamily of Chrysetidae. If you look at the skull, it looks a lot like a vole. If you kind of realize that it's a giant vole, you can see it, but it's so much bigger with that kind of a vertically compressed tail for swimming, found in the water. But yeah, this is the muskrat. Now, voles. We have a lot of different voles. There are lots of voles all over, well, lots of parts of the world. We'll just focus on Montana. Voles are kind of small and generally brown or gray, short tails, not as big of ears as the mice. These are 3 species we have. Southern red-backed vole has this red back. Sagebrush vole and the western heather vole are a little lighter colored and critically have shorter tails than the other species, but you can check out the other videos for that. And then we have 5 species of Microtus. We'll look at 4. The prairie vole doesn't get to western Montana, and it's really similar to the others, so we're going to ignore it. Lots of Microtus. These are your kind of typical voles, and they look very similar. The long-tailed vole has a bit longer of a tail. The water vole is quite a bit larger, but we'll talk about these things when we look at in the other videos where we go over identification. We're going to be looking a lot at vole teeth, and there's a lot of information on this slide, so before I overwhelm you, let me just orient you. These photos on the right are photos of molars, and they're arranged so that anterior is up, posterior is down, buccal, the cheek side, is to the left, lingual, the tongue side, is to the right. So that's, I have the little arrows in the top left to indicate, to orient you, to get an idea of what you're looking at. So all voles have 3 upper molars, 3 lower molars too, but we're not going to really look at that. We'll just look at the upper molars. And you can see that these are prismatic teeth. So they have an outline that is enamel, and then the center of the tooth isn't covered with enamel. So if you look from the side, they're flat across the top. They're flat crowned, and they're prismatic because of these kind of outlines. That should sound familiar because we talked about prismatic teeth with Neotoma cinerea and with Thonomys talpoides, the pack rat and the pocket gopher. Now, I think of these as kind of Christmas tree, looking especially at the Microtus pennsylvanicus, you can see kind of zigzags back and forth with these little triangles. Kind of looks like an upside down Christmas tree to me. That's a key sign that you're looking at a vole, or at least arvicolinae. It could be a muskrat if it's a big skull. Now, when we're looking at these, we're going to be looking a lot at the 3rd molar, in particular the number of points that are jutting inwards on the tongue side. We're calling these reentrant angles. That's what the key calls it. It's a little, I don't know, confusing wording, but if you know, that's what we're going to say. So this one on the left, we see 4 points pointing inward. I've numbered them in red, 1, 2, 3, 4, looking at the bottom tooth, M3. Myotis gapri, the middle tooth photo, you also see 4 angles pointing inward. Synaptomes cooperi, well, this is, we actually have Synaptomes borealis, but it's the same genus. And in this genus, you don't really see the big, strong indentations pointing inwards the way that you do with the other ones. And that should tell you, aha, this is a lemming skull. Because it has zigzags and otherwise looks like a vole skull, except it has 0 reentrant angles. So now on the bottom left, I have M3 number of reentrant angles. This is something that you should know. If you have a vole skull, you figured out that it's a vole, it's too small to be a muskrat, then how many reentrant angles does it have? 0, synaptomes. 3 reentrant angles, lemniscus or phennocomes. 4, microtus or myotes. And check out the other video for how to identify past that. One last thing that I want to say here on this slide is the Microtus pennsylvanicus has 4 reentrant angles, like other microtus and like myotes. However, unique to this species is the loop on M2. So what I mean is you look at the second molar, and at the very end, there's this kind of circle. So it's not a weird triangle thing like everything else. It's this little, tight little circle. That is what the key refers to as a posterior loop. And I wanted to talk about this here because I'm not able to talk about it in the video where I'm standing in front of the whiteboard because it's small and hard to see and kind of need a magnifier. So pointing this out here. All right, so this week we have 9 species: muskrat on Datra zibethicus, the bog lemming, northern bog lemming, southern, but I forget which, Synaptomes borealis, I remember the scientific names more. Then we have 3 kind of unique genera, lemniscus, phennocomes, and myotes, and then we have 4 all microtus. So check out the other videos for how to identify the skins and the skulls of these species.